I am the busiest queen in the harem, rising earlier than the roosters and sleeping later than the dogs. Even while pregnant, I have to manage all the affairs of the harem, from morning rituals to evening duties, reviewing accounts, educating the children, for my sake. The emperor hasn't summoned any concubines since I became pregnant. All the court officials praise him for his deep affection, loyalty, and sense of duty. But that day, as I once again worked late into the night and finally lay down to rest, I suddenly heard a tiny, milky voice coming from my belly. I really feel sorry for Mother Empress. Father Emperor is such a hypocrite, always pretending to be devoted and faithful, yet he sneaks off to that consort goose chambers every night, using Mother Empress as a cover. And the Crown Prince is no good either. Mother Empress was strict with him, found him the best tutors. Yet he resented her for it and ended up harming her together with Consort Gu. Now Mother Empress is about to be deposed, and I was handed over to Consort Gu, but she was so frightened she dropped me and I died. Woo woo. So heartbreaking. After hearing this, I was stunned for a long time, and the next day I slept straight through until the sun was high in the sky. Everyone in the palace was completely shocked. No one expected the most diligent and hardworking empress to completely give up and slack off. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful stories every day. Now the story begins. On the first day of slacking off, I declined the concubine's morning greetings, refused the emperor's meal invitation, turned down the crown prince's recitation request, and even rejected the chief eunuch's financial report. I spent my days in the palace eating, sleeping, playing chess when bored, and reading picture books. For the first time, I felt life could be so carefree, no responsibilities, no trivial matters. The little one in my belly has been quite active lately. Why has Mother Empress changed her temperament recently? But this is for the best. No more exhausting myself to pave the way for others. Taking good care of my health is what matters most. Hearing these words, a warm feeling surged in my heart, though I let out an almost imperceptible sigh. Lately, there have indeed been quite a few criticisms of me in the court, though not because of my recent slacking off. Even the emperor holding court once every 3 days is considered quite diligent. As a pregnant woman, sleeping in for a few days is something no one can fault me for. But ever since I became pregnant, the emperor has publicly declared that for my sake, he no longer visits the harem at night, although the court and the public praise him for his devotion and righteousness. Some suspect that I, the empress, am so consumed by jealousy that the emperor dares not summon other consorts. Many ministers have even submitted memorials to me, urging me not to be intolerant and to avoid tarnishing the dignity befitting the mother of the nation. Of course, I also advised the emperor, but at that time, he held my hand affectionately and assured me, "Empress, I have said that only you can bear my heirs, now that you are pregnant. If you join those old conservatives in pressuring me at this time, it would be a waste of my sincere devotion." I looked into his earnest eyes and actually believed his nonsense. From then on, I became even more deeply involved in the affairs of the harem, handling everything personally. So even though I listened to the little one in my belly that night, I wasn't entirely convinced and immediately sent someone to investigate consort goose chambers. Indeed, I heard that supreme ruler whispering intimately in his little consort's ear, as if they were a loving couple. The emperor, who once claimed to have genuine feelings for me, was merely using me as an excuse to shield himself from public criticism, while he exclusively doted on his new favorite. I hadn't even enjoyed a third day of sleeping in when trouble came knocking on its own. Just as the sky began to lighten, I was awakened by a commotion outside the palace hall. "Your Highness the Crown Prince. Her Majesty the Empress has not yet awakened, you cannot enter. Her Majesty has been far too indulgent these past few days. Ignoring the morning greetings is one thing, but to have Gu Dang kneel outside if anything were to happen to her, could Her Majesty bear the blame?" In the end, the palace maid could not stop the determined Crown Prince. Pei Che lifted the beaded curtain and stormed into my bedchamber. His gaze was sharp as fire, his furrowed brow commanding authority even without anger. Though only 13, he already bore the early bearing of an emperor. This was the young master of the nation I had meticulously nurtured, into whom I had poured endless effort, teaching him etiquette, engaging renowned tutors, winning over key ministers. I had smoothed every rough path ahead for him. But now he's giving me the cold shoulder because of another woman. The little one in my belly was also woken up by the noise, chirping and clamoring. My royal brother is truly blinded by foolishness. Actually joining forces with outsiders against his own mother, and even informing our father about it. He's dead set on making our mother face punishment. My heart sank at these words as I looked at the child I had raised with my own hands, standing straight and looking down at me from above. Mother, you've been so lazy these past 2 days. How can you still be sleeping in the palace when the consorts come to pay their respects? I looked at him coldly, said nothing else. Turned over and got out of bed, pulled the paddle from under the pillow, and walked up to him. Kneel down. My voice wasn't loud, but it made Pei Che, who was a head taller than me, tense up and almost involuntarily drop to his knees. The next moment, the paddle in my hand landed on his back, and he couldn't help but let out a cry of pain. Mother Empress, what are you doing? Pei Che finally regained his respect for me. Though grimacing in pain, he dared not move an inch. I had never beaten him like this before. After all, he is my own flesh and blood. Hurting him feels like hurting my own heart. But today, because of that obscure consort Gu, he came to his mother's bedchamber before dawn to demand an explanation, without even a word of respect. I almost wondered if all my years of careful upbringing had been wasted on him, showing no respect for your elders and speaking so rudely. Who taught you this? I scolded sharply. Pei Che pursed his lips and lowered his head in silence. I watched as tears welled up in his eyes, and my heart softened. He's still a child, he'll understand when he grows up. But before I could speak, a sharp cry echoed from behind the beaded curtain, and a figure in a light green dress drifted over, without a word. She wrapped her arms around Pei Che, who was kneeling on the ground, and sobbed, "Your Majesty, if you must punish someone, punish me. The Crown Prince only came to you because he was upset seeing me faint from exhaustion after kneeling in front of your palace." As she spoke, she tenderly stroked the prince's head. "The Crown Prince is so young. He rises before dawn every day to study and practice martial arts. Of course, he doesn't have the leisure your Majesty enjoys. I know who this figure weeping before me is. It's none other than Lady Gu Yarrow." I watched coldly as the Crown Prince, the moment she threw herself at him, instantly shifted from a look of self-reflection back to one of anger and heartache. Patting her back and comforting her softly a few times, he stood up and looked at me with an indignant expression. "Mother Empress, as the queen of this nation, you lack the capacity to tolerate others and neglect the affairs of the inner court. You deserve punishment. Out of respect for you being my birth mother, I will only confine you to your quarters for 3 days." He hadn't finished speaking when my slap landed on his face the next second. "Pei Che." I rarely called him by his full name, leaving aside that I did nothing wrong. Even if I had made some mistake, it's not your place to discipline me. Have you fed all the manners I taught you to the dogs? Pei Che was somewhat stunned by my slap and didn't react for a long moment, my chest heaving. I looked at Gu Yarrow, who had just rushed in and was kneeling on the ground, and spoke coldly. "Guards, drag Lady Gu away and beat her to death. How dare a mere low-ranking consort barge into my bedchamber so brazenly? Does the harem have no order at all?" At my command, the palace maids filed in, roughly grabbing Gu Yarrow's limbs and dragging her out. Gu Yarrow clearly hadn't expected me to act so decisively. The heartache and grievance on her face instantly turned to terror as she struggled to explain. "Your Majesty, spare my life. I was just too concerned about the Crown Prince. And my concern led to recklessness. That's why I barged in. Please spare me, Your Majesty, spare me." Her plea was a shrill, piercing scream that made me frown. I stepped forward, pinched her face, and said word by word, "Trespassing into the Empress's palace is a capital offense. What excuse do you think could save you? Take her away." Gu Yarrow was still struggling, her long nails scratching the ground, leaving clear marks. I glanced at Pei Che, who was still frozen in place. "You go and see too. The only reason you weren't executed is because you're the Crown Prince." Just as I stepped out of the hall, the voice of Meng Bao came from my belly again. "Mom is so cool, but it's no use. That big scoundrel Dad is coming soon. He'll definitely protect this Lady Gu and blame Mom. War. What should we do?" How soon is right away? Palace beatings are divided into fatal and non-fatal strikes. Non-fatal strikes on the buttocks and thighs only cause flesh wounds, while fatal strikes on the back and abdomen can shatter internal organs. For a delicate woman of the inner palace, 5 fatal strikes would be enough to end her life. Proceed with the punishment, I said immediately. The senior palace maid in charge of the execution saw me cross my right hand over the back of my left, a signal for a fatal beating. She paused only for a moment, then hardened her resolve and struck down fiercely. Although I am strict as the Empress, I am lenient with others. Even if there are mistakes, most are only verbally admonished, never harming the foundation. I never expected that today would bring a death sentence by beating. Instantly, the courtyard echoed with piercing screams. I counted the strikes, no more and no less, exactly 5, at the same time. Hurried footsteps and an angry shout came from outside the hall. Stop! A figure in bright yellow rushed into the hall in a frenzy. Everyone hurriedly knelt down, while I only bowed in salute. Your Majesty. This low-ranking consort trespassed into the Empress's palace without permission, according to the rules of etiquette. Before I could finish, the next second I felt a wind-whipping slap strike my face with such force that it sent me tumbling to the ground. The Emperor exuded an intimidating aura of authority even without showing anger. You jealous woman, how dare you harm others like this? Do you know what punishment awaits those who harm the imperial heir? At the same time, Jiyu Yao, who was being restrained on the long bench, wailed, Your Majesty, it's all my fault. I failed to protect your child. I might as well be dead. Jiyu Yao, the child. I didn't know which to be more shocked by first, but what was even more surprising was Jiyu Yao's vigorous shouting just now. Logically speaking, after 5 strikes of the death rod, even if she hadn't died on the spot in the chair, she should have succumbed to her injuries upon returning. How could she possibly shout this accusation with such robust energy? Secondly, I struggled to my feet, my eyes red as I glared at that furious, most revered man in the world. Once, we were a deeply affectionate couple who shared everything with each other. We were once deeply in love, our eyes unable to leave each other, wishing we could carry one another around like a cherished possession wherever we went. He once blushed, gripping my hand with the shyness and recklessness of youth. Aignan. Whether I am the crown prince now or the emperor in the future, I will love only you for the rest of my life. Will you bear me many children? On the day of his coronation, he made me the empress, vowing solemnly, before our ancestors, I promise you today that I will never father children with anyone else. Only the children born to Aignan are worthy of being mine. But now he is furious, looking at me as if I were his enemy, personally coming to accuse me. Do you know the crime of harming the dragon's heir? Although I had long prepared myself, hearing that dearest and most beloved person actually accuse me because of another woman still made my heart ache uncontrollably. I watched him nervously help Jiyu Yao up from the long chair, his pained and cautious expression stinging my eyes. Not even on the day I gave birth to the crown prince did I see him so tense, and the child I carried for 10 months, Crown Prince Pei Che, rushed over and knelt at Consort Gu's knees, shedding tears. Mother Jiyu, are you all right? Don't worry, the little brother in your belly will surely be fine. Emperor Pei Yangchuan anxiously wanted to carry Jiyu Yao back to her palace but was stopped by Pei Che. Father, going back to that remote place would waste too much time. Let's just do it here. Pei Yangchuan was taken aback and hesitated. But this is your mother's. At that moment, another agonized scream came from Jiyu Yao on the bench. And she fainted. The hesitation in Pei Yangchuan's eyes vanished instantly. He trembled with anxiety, no longer caring about anything else. Quick, carry her inside at once. Summon the imperial physician. Witnessing the scene before me, I couldn't help but shout. Your Majesty, all the palace maids and eunuchs, even the emperor who had just questioned me, froze in their movements. My words rang out with force. Do you remember that this is the Empress's palace? Looking at my expression, Pei Yangchuan's face showed a trace of hesitation once again. But the crown prince seemed determined to oppose me, widening his eyes and pointing at my nose. Mother Empress, normally I would let it go, but this is a matter of life and death. You injured Lady Jiyu so badly. Yet you refuse to even give up a palace. This is a disgrace to your virtue. Jiyu Anyang, ha, how affectionate that sounds. I, his birth mother, never once heard him call me Anyang, yet he turns around and acknowledges another as his mother, after the crown prince's words. Pei Yangchuan finally stopped hesitating. He ordered the palace maids and eunuchs to carry the injured Jiyu Yaro into the empress's bedchamber, shouting at the newly arrived imperial physicians, "If you can't cure Yaro Yaro, I'll have all of you buried with her." For a full hour, I stood under the scorching sun, cold sweat beading on the tip of my nose. Pei Yangchuan had forgotten that I, too, was pregnant. Scorched by the blazing sun, even the little one in my arms began to wilt. Father and the crown prince are such big villains, they're about to banish mother to the cold palace. What should I do? I narrowed my eyes slightly, and upon hearing the words banished to the cold palace, I could no longer hold back. Chun Dao, send a letter to my elder brother, tell him exactly what happened today, and let him know I miss home. The senior palace maid, Chun Dao, quickly responded and hurried off to make the preparations. I sneered as I looked toward the hall. Seizing the throne was an extremely difficult task, although Pei Yangchuan was the crown prince. Without the support of my father and brother from the border, and with those wolf-like, tiger-hearted brothers by his side, he might not have been able to secure that throne. This was also the reason he had once promised not to leave any heirs in another woman's womb. He had experienced the deceit and treachery among the princes. Yet in the end, he still broke his word. When he was the crown prince, he relied on the 500,000 troops of my father and brother. Now that he has become the emperor, I want to see how he can stabilize his position without their support. The commotion in the hall finally subsided. Jiyu Yaro had actually survived, and even the child in her womb remained unharmed. Pei Yangchuan walked out and saw me standing in the courtyard, my face deathly pale. His gaze held not a trace of affection anymore. Guards, take the empress to the cold palace. Without my order, she is not to take a single step out. The guards beside me moved to seize me, but I shook them off and said coldly, I will walk on my own. When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. After 3 days in the cold palace, with only leftovers and cold meals, and the servants neglecting me, I caught a chill within 2 days and fell seriously ill. I never expected the first person to visit me would be the crown prince. Pei Che carefully walked in and knelt before me. Mother, you've suffered these past few days in the cold palace. Don't worry, I've been persuading father. You'll be out in no more than a couple of days. I heard you've caught a chill recently, so I specially brought you some medicinal soup. Drink it quickly, it will also be good for the little brother or sister in your belly. I leaned against the wall, a warm current flowing through my heart. Taking the medicinal soup Pei Che handed me, I smiled. After all, he was my own child. How could he bear to see his birth mother suffer? But just as my lips were about to touch the rim of the bowl, a weak yet urgent voice sounded from my belly. Mother, don't drink it. This isn't medicine for a cold, it's a potent abortifacient. If you drink it, it'll cause severe bleeding, and both you and the baby will be lost. My body froze for a moment, my blood running cold as I stared at Pei Che, who was still smiling warmly before me. My own child, whom I've nurtured with care for 13 years, paving the way for him and always thinking of his future, actually wants to kill me. The little one in my belly seemed almost on the verge of crying. How tragic for the Empress Dowager. She worked herself to the bone for the Emperor and the Crown Prince in the past, and now she's being plotted against by these two, to the point of death. How could the Crown Prince come up with such a vicious idea? It must be the Emperor who ordered him to kill the Empress Dowager. I couldn't help but heave in my chest, my arm trembling so much that I couldn't hold the bowl of medicinal soup. With a clang, it fell to the ground, shattering into pieces along with the spilled broth. The scalding medicinal soup splashed onto Pei Che's feet, and the tenderness that had just been on his face instantly shattered. Useless. You can't even hold a bowl of medicine steady. No wonder father abandoned you in the cold palace. He turned away with a cold expression, adding before leaving, I'll send another dose of medicine tomorrow. Someone else will feed it to you. Trembling with anger, I watched his retreating figure, my heart as cold as ashes. From then on, I would act as if I never had this son. Come out, I called softly. In the darkness of the cold palace, a shadowy figure silently emerged. This was the shadow guard my father and brother had assigned to me since childhood. The borderlands were too far for them to return in time. But these shadow guards could at least ensure my safety. Miss, I will go and deal with that despicable emperor and his little favorite. I closed my eyes in contemplation and did not respond. I, too, was thinking, if I killed them, could I truly escape unscathed before my father and brother even reached the capital? Suddenly, the little one in my womb spoke up again with indignation. I'm still so angry. Father is happily eating the meal made by that little concubine, who is actually a spy sent by another country with the goal of killing him. Does father even have a brain? He's actually planning to poison mother for her sake, and sooner or later, he'll be poisoned himself. These words made me raise an eyebrow. Oh, upon careful thought, it does make sense. Jiyu Yarrow was beaten with 50 heavy staff strikes that day. Yet not only did she not die, but she didn't even miscarry. Such physical resilience really shouldn't be something a palace concubine possesses. I curled my lips into a cruel smile and shook my head at the shadow guard. No need. Perhaps we won't even need to lift a finger. The next night, the potent abortifacient was only swallowed by me in front of Pei Che before he felt assured enough to leave. But the moment he left, the dark shadow guard used internal energy to force me to vomit the medicinal brew. With the dark shadow guard around, life in the cold palace wasn't too bad. I could simply take whatever I wanted to eat from the imperial kitchen. However, after drinking that brew, I showed no adverse effects at all, which actually made Pei Yenchuan's side rather anxious. I know what's on his mind. If I don't die, how can I make way for his beloved Lady Jiyu? But I shouldn't call her Lady Jiyu anymore. In just half a month, Jiyu Yarrow has been promoted 3 ranks in a row, rising to the rank of WN consort. Such a rapid promotion is unprecedented in the harem's centuries of history. Even the ministers at court have expressed extreme dissatisfaction, with some senior officials submitting memorials of protest. Your Majesty, a mere palace attendant, even if she is carrying the royal heir, should not be promoted so quickly. This goes against the rules of propriety. However, Pei Yangchuan did not take such remarks as lightly as he did the gossip about me. He immediately ordered the advising minister to be given 30 strokes with a heavy rod in court. The old man, with his frail bones, did not survive past the 10th stroke. The entire court was thrown into shock and dismay. They all wanted to appeal to me, the Empress, only to find that I had already been banished to the cold palace. Finally, someone realized that the emperor was serious. Not only was the sky about to change in the inner court, but perhaps the entire imperial court was on the verge of upheaval. From then on, everyone in the court and beyond lived in fear. Veteran ministers of great merit resigned one after another, retiring to their hometowns. Even the most passionate and loyal officials hesitated and grew silent. Newly appointed officials were all cunning and deceitful sycophants, skilled only in flattery, turning the court into a place of corruption and chaos. Because Pei Yangchuan spent every night indulging with Jiyu Yarrow, he even missed the morning court sessions. The emperor was so debauched and neglected state affairs, yet none of the ministers dared to speak up or offer advice. This is an omen of the nation's downfall, I murmured, leaning against the bed as I flipped through an ancient book in my hands, reading aloud one of its lines. Then, gently stroking my already swollen belly, I whispered unintentionally, "Do you understand, little one? In the future, don't be like your father and brother, ruling a country. Don't act willfully, be diligent in heeding advice." The little one inside my belly excitedly kicked with its tiny feet. Understood. Her Majesty truly lives up to her title, even in our current predicament. She insists on prenatal lessons about state governance for the baby, but since the baby is a princess, I wonder if Her Majesty will be upset when she sees me. The little one in my belly seemed to wilt for a moment, which I found rather amusing. So small, yet already burdened with such worries. A shadow guard in the room stepped forward, presenting the latest pastries from the imperial kitchen. Since pregnant women should eat small, frequent meals, the shadow guard regularly brought her snacks. "Miss, the Grand General and the young General are less than 300 li from the capital. They are expected to arrive in 3 days." I took a bite of the dessert, nodded, and said, "Let my father and brother wait outside the capital for a while. and help me look into something while they're at it?" "Yes, miss," the shadow guard responded promptly. "Miss, the young prince is sure to become a pillar of the nation. Please don't worry too much." Before leaving, the shadow guard hesitated and offered words of comfort. "After all, I had been banished to the cold palace overnight and spent my days solely on prenatal education for my unborn child. He was afraid I might be losing my mind. I knew he meant well and nodded, but then corrected him, not a little prince, but a little princess." The shadow guard was taken aback, a bit confused, but still turned and left the room. The little one in my belly seemed to hear my words and instantly became overjoyed. "Yay, yay, yay, how did mother know I'm a little princess? Could it be the special bond between mother and daughter? That's great, mother won't dislike me now." Because of the excitement, the little one gave a kick on the belly, then quickly held back. "No, no, mother is already feeling down in the cold palace. I can't make her feel worse." I smiled gently, patted my belly, and hummed a cheerful tune. "Mother would never dislike the baby. The little one is my great blessing. I've been living leisurely in the cold palace, with no one to bother me and nothing to worry about. Plus, pregnancy has made me sleepy, and these days in the cold palace have actually helped me gain a few pounds." However, during my leisurely days, quite a few major events did occur outside. Recently, the palace has been abuzz with discussions. Crown Prince Pei Che forced himself upon a young palace maid in the imperial garden. It is said that the maid's appearance bore an 8 out of 10 resemblance to the currently favored noble consort Gu. A young palace maid exclaimed in shock, "Isn't the crown prince just 13 years old this year? Losing his vitality so early, wouldn't it harm his health?" Another patted her on the shoulder and said, "You've missed the point. How old the crown prince is doesn't matter anymore. What's important is that the emperor flew into a rage upon hearing about this, whipped the crown prince several times, and beat him until his flesh was torn open. That is to say, the crown prince might truly like." Another palace maid covered her mouth, nervously saying, "You can't say that out loud, just keep it to yourself." When I heard about this, my face darkened. I had no hope for Pei Che. He could serve me that fatal bowl of medicine without even flinching. At that moment, the bond between us as mother and son had long been severed. I'm just amazed, wondering who on earth Jiu Yarrow is, to have both my husband and son so completely bewitched by her. Upon hearing the news in the court that the emperor and the crown prince had turned against each other over a woman, the long-suppressed discontent finally erupted. Dozens of officials knelt before the palace, submitting petitions denouncing noble consort Gu as a calamitous enchantress and demanding her immediate execution to appease heaven and earth. But how could Pei Yangchuan possibly agree? In the court, he flew into a tremendous rage, drew his sword, descended the hall, and beheaded the 2 leading first-rank officials, their blood flowing all over the ground. All the ministers were so terrified they wet their pants, kneeling firmly on the ground, unwilling to raise their heads. In truth, had they looked up, they would have noticed Pei Yangchuan's face was deathly pale, his lips dark purple, and even his once thick black hair was now sparse, continuously falling out as he swayed unsteadily. This was the appearance of someone who had been poisoned and was not long for this world. As a spy, Jiu Yarrow was undoubtedly successful. She forced the empress into the cold palace, caused the emperor to neglect state affairs, made the crown prince abandon his studies, and left the ministers seething with anger but too afraid to speak out. She even turned the emperor and his own son against each other. A country that loses both its ruler and its crown prince is bound to fall into internal chaos. If I'm not mistaken, the day the internal strife begins, foreign enemies will also come knocking at the door. She had calculated everything. But she never expected that the deposed empress in the cold palace was no ordinary, meek woman. I am waiting for an opportunity, a chance to use Jiu Yarrow to eliminate the heartless man and the ungrateful wolf, and then stage a comeback from the brink of defeat. Finally, after half a month, a major piece of news came from the palace. The crown prince had passed away. It was said that the crown prince died from poisoning. His face turned blue as he died, and he reportedly writhed and rolled on the ground for half an hour before vomiting a large amount of blood and collapsing dead. Upon hearing the news, the court and the common people were thrown into turmoil. Many officials immediately resigned and returned to their hometowns or moved to other regions. The atmosphere in the capital had completely changed. With the crown prince dead and the emperor consumed by bloodthirsty rage, would the very sky over this land also be on the verge of changing? The crown prince summoned me before his death, lying on the ground vomiting blood and writhing in pain, 2 clear trails of tears streaking down his pale face. He kept hoarsely crying out, "Mother, mother, mama." By the time I rushed to the Eastern Palace, Pei was already lying on the ground, unable to move. In the end, I couldn't hold back. I rushed forward and held his shoulders, tears falling uncontrollably. "Mother." Cough, cough. Pei forced a smile. "I was wrong, mother, I was wrong." Cough, cough, cough. He laughed until he cried, "Thank goodness you're all right. Please let uncle take you away. Don't stay in the palace any longer. Father." His voice suddenly cut off, the rest of his words choked by a surge of metallic sweetness in his throat, leaving him breathless for a long moment. His arm abruptly fell limp, his eyes still wide open and unblinking. I held my child in my arms, wailing bitterly in the hall. I thought I wouldn't feel an ounce of heartache for this ungrateful wretch anymore, but when he was truly on the verge of death, calling out again and again, "Mother," my heart still ached uncontrollably, and my tears still fell involuntarily. I knew what the unspoken half of his sentence meant. Father has gone mad. Pei Yangchuan has gone mad. He actually laid a hand on his own son, all because of that woman, that spy sent from another country. I shed my last tear in a foreign land, stood up, and with a determined gaze looked toward the palace hall, gently touching my 7-month pregnant belly. "My child, in the future, never repeat the mistakes of your father and your elder brother." I knew that the opportunity one had been waiting for over a month had finally arrived. As the Empress, I led the palace guards and soldiers, along with several hundred shadow guards, to the entrance of the Hall of Mental Cultivation. Pei Yangchuan had been holed up here with his favored consort, Gu. For 3 days, skipping morning court sessions, neglecting to review memorials, and handling no official business. If my guess is correct, he probably doesn't have many days left to live. It had been over 3 months since Jiu Yarrow gained his favor. By now, the slow-acting poison should have spread throughout his body, and his life was nearing its end. I hold the sword in my hand, pointing it toward the sky above, and shout to all the soldiers behind me. The Emperor has been bewitched by the Demoness and is in mortal danger. Capture the Demoness, save the Emperor. From behind comes a thunderous response. Capture the Demoness, save the Emperor. Capture the Demoness, save the Emperor. Capture the Sorceress, save His Majesty. I raised my sword toward the gate of the Hall of Mental Cultivation and gave the order. Charge! All the soldiers around me, brandishing their blades, roared and surged into the hall, cramming the sizable space until it was packed tight. Inside the hall, there was no one putting up a desperate resistance. They were easily surrounded. But Pei Yangchuan's condition was far worse than I had imagined. He lay on the bed, his hair almost completely gone, with only a finger's width left.
At me provocatively as if she had already envisioned me kneeling and begging her. I smiled non-committally. "Oh. Which Liang kingdom are you referring to? Do you mean the Liang prefecture that my father and brother just conquered? It is now the territory of our Wei kingdom. As for your majesty, he naturally revealed your secret in exchange for his life. So, I drawled out the word, leaning down close to Jiu Yarrow's ear. You're a discarded piece now." I watched as her previously arrogant and disdainful eyes slowly widened, turning into sheer terror, her entire face deathly pale, her lips trembling. "Impossible, impossible, you're lying. Whether I'm lying or not, you can go ask your Liang kingdom soldiers in the underworld yourself. Guards, take this treacherous consort away and execute her by 1,000 cuts." I gave the final order, and the shadow guards restraining Jiu Yarrow immediately dragged her out of the Hall of Mental Cultivation. Even in her final moments, Jiu Yarrow refused to believe my words, struggling fiercely. You're lying. When the Emperor's army arrives, you will all die with me." Her voice faded into the distance, and the Hall of Mental Cultivation fell into silence once more. On the bed, Pei Yangchuan seemed to sense something, forcing a few broken syllables from his hoarse throat, his withered hand half raised as if reaching toward the sky. I slowly walked to his bedside, looking at that face that was almost unrecognizable, aged countless times over. and felt not the slightest ripple of emotion in my heart. I slowly sat by the bed. And Pei Yangchuan turned his head with great effort to look at my face. He stared for a long time before finally recognizing who I was. Then his body reacted intensely, his muscles tensing all over, and a muffled sound came from his throat, like the winter wind outside the window, unintelligible and unclear. I didn't know if he wanted to come closer or to escape, nor did I know whether he felt guilt or hatred for me in his heart. But none of this matters anymore, his hatred or love, his guilt or deceit, none of it has anything to do with me. Pei Yangchuan, you should never have done it. Why did you incite Ha to harm me? Why did you poison him and cause his death? He was your own son, blind to the truth, swayed by others, stubborn and self-righteous, persecuting the loyal and the good. You are unworthy to be a ruler. I don't know if Pei Yangchuan heard these words clearly, but in the end, he quieted down and made no further response. Just staring at me with those clouded eyes, I did not shed tears for him, but merely closed my eyes and whispered softly, "Send His Majesty on his final journey." The shadow guard beside me, upon receiving the order, immediately stepped forward and pulled a pillow from the bed to cover Pei Yangchuan's face. I turned my back, not daring to look. In the end, he made no sound, and I do not know if he struggled. I do not know if it was because he was already terminally ill, or if his conscience had stirred and he did not wish to cause me more trouble. A full quarter of an hour later, tragic news came from the Hall of Mental Cultivation. Your Majesty has passed away, according to historical records, in the autumn of the 23rd year of the Qianqi era, the 7th month. The Emperor passed away in the Hall of Mental Cultivation at the age of 36. The Empress later led the Imperial Guards to surround the hall, captured the bewitching consort Lady Ji, and had her executed by Ling Kai, death by 1,000 cuts. Her corpse was exposed at the Western Market. The Grand General and the young general, the Empress's maternal relatives, led troops into the capital to stabilize the court. From then on, she carried the imperial heir in her womb and governed from behind the curtain. In October of the same year, she gave birth to a princess and continued to rule from behind the curtain while holding her daughter. The world was at peace, and the realm was tranquil. 3 years later, I had just returned from court when my daughter rushed into my arms. "Mother, I've finished reciting my lessons. I want to go out of the palace with uncle to play." The little girl pouted, her eyes glistening with such pitifulness, but I still firmly refused. "This month we agreed you could only leave the palace 3 times, and you've already used them all. You're not allowed to go." The little girl frowned, let out her HMPH, and said flatly, "Fine, Mother, I know what you're planning." The little girl said with arms crossed, as if it were obvious. "Of course, when I grow up, you'll hand the kingdom of Wei over to me, and you and grandfather can go back to your carefree life in the borderlands. That's why you're making me study so much now. But Mother, you have to think, after I grow up, I'll have to dedicate my whole life to the kingdom of Wei. If I don't go out and have fun while I'm still young, I'll really never get the chance." I sighed helplessly and rubbed my forehead. "How do you know I want to hand the kingdom of Wei over to you?" The little girl's eyes darted around mischievously. "Don't you worry about that. I knew it even when I was still in the womb. I really can't refuse this reason, because what she said is indeed my future plan." All right, I'll make an exception just this once. Only this time. Come back early." Upon hearing my words, the child excitedly ran toward the palace gate. With a bright smile, she turned back and promised me, "Understood, Mother Empress. I'll bring back some candied hawthorns for you." I called out to her with a smile, "Bring some for your imperial brother and father as well." "Understood." Watching the child's figure disappear into the distance, I turned my gaze to the 2 flower-filled graves in the backyard. The bodies of Pei Che and Pei Yangchuan were buried here. What lay in the imperial mausoleum were merely cenotaphs. There was no other reason, simply because a master fortune-teller had divined that burying the deceased of the family here would help conceal the living blood relatives. I breathed a sigh of relief and turned back to the Qianqing Palace to review today's memorials. To be honest, I'm doing a much better job as emperor than Pei Yangchuan.